Hi Year 5, here's the rest of Chapter 5 and the start of Chapter 6. My recurring nightmare was the mosquitoes. At night. From dusk onwards they searched me out, buzzed in on me and ate me alive. There was no hiding place. My nights were one long torture, and in the morning I would scratch myself raw in places. Some of the bites, particularly on my legs, had now swelled up and become red sores. I found relief from them only by dunking myself in the cool of the sea. I tried sleeping in another cave, deeper and darker, but it smelt dreadful. Once I discovered it was full of bats, I left at once. Wherever I slept, the mosquitoes found me soon enough. It got so that I dreaded the coming of every night. I cried out aloud in my misery as I swiped and flailed at them. I longed for the mornings, for the cool of the sea, and for the cool of the wind on my hilltop. Here I would spend the greater part of my day, sitting on the very summit, looking out to sea and hoping, sometimes even praying too, for the sight of a ship. I'd close my eyes tight shut and pray for as long as I could, then open them again. Every time I did it, I really felt, really believed that there was a chance that my prayers would be answered, that this time I'd open my eyes and see the Peggy Sue sailing back to rescue me. But also the great wide ocean was empty, the line of the horizon quite uninterrupted. I was always disappointed, of course, often dejected, but not yet completely despondent, not in those early weeks. I had severe problems too with my sunburn. I'd learned rather late that I should keep all of my clothes on all of the time, and I made myself a hat to keep the sun off my face and neck. It was very broad and Chinese looking, made of palm leaves, the edges folded into one another. I was quite pleased with my handiwork. Sunburn, I discovered, was a discomfort I could help to prevent, and that seawater could soothe. At noon I would go down the hill to shelter in my cave from the burning heat of that afternoon sun, and then afterwards I'd go swimming. This was the moment that Stella longed for each day. I spent long hours throwing a stick for her. She loved it, and to be truthful, so did I. It was the highlight of our day. We'd stop only when the darkness came down. It always came down surprisingly quickly too, and drove us back once more to our cave, back to my nightly battle with my blood-sucking tormentors. One day, after yet another fruitless morning of watching on the hill, Stella and I were coming out of the forest when I spotted something lying on the sand just outside of our cave. At a distance, it looked like a piece of driftwood. Stella got there before me and was sniffing it excitedly. I could see it now for what it was. It was not driftwood at all, but a roll of rush matting. I unrolled it. Inside, and neatly folded, was a sheet, a white sheet. He knew. The old man knew my miseries, my discomforts, my every need. He'd been watching me all the time, and closely too. He must have seen me scratching myself, seen the red wells on my legs, my arms, seen me sitting in the sea every morning to soothe them away. Surely this must mean that he had forgiven me now for lighting the fire. I carried the matting inside the cave, unrolled it, wound myself in the sheet, and just lay there, giggling with joy. I could pull the sheet right over my face. Tonight, there would be no way in for those cursed mosquitoes. Tonight, they would go hungry. I went racing along the beach to the boundary line, where I stopped, cut my hands to my mouth, and shouted, "Thank you! Thank you for my bed! Thank you!" I didn't really expect an answer, and none came. I hoped he might come himself, but he didn't. So I wrote my thanks in the sand, right by the boundary line, and signed it. I wanted so much to see him again, to talk to him, to hear that human voice. Stella had been a wonderful companion to me, good for confiding in, good for a cuddle, good for a game or two, but I so missed human company. My mother, father, lost to me for now. perhaps even forever. I longed to see the old man, to speak to him, even if he was a bit mad, even if I couldn't understand much of what he was saying. That night, I was determined to stay awake for him, but comfortable on my new matting bed, protected and swaddled in my sheet, I went to sleep quickly and never woke once. The next morning, after a breakfast of fish and jackfruit and coconut, Stella and I made our way back up to the top of the hill, or Watch Hill as I'd now called it. The other one I had named His Hill. I was repairing my Chinese hat, replacing some of the palm leaves. It never seemed to hold together very long. When I looked up and saw a ship on the horizon. There was no mistake. It was the long, bulky profile of a super tanker. This is chapter 6. In an instant, I was on my feet, shouting at the top of my voice and waving frantically. I leapt up and down, screaming for him to stop, to hear me, to see me. I'm here! I'm over here! Only when my throat was raw and I could shout no longer did I stop. The tanker crept tantalisingly slowly across the horizon. It did not turn, and by then I knew it would not turn. I knew too that no one would be looking, and that even if they were, this entire island would be little more than a distant hazy hump on the horizon. How then could they possibly see me? I could only look on, helpless and distraught, as the tanker moved further and further away until it began to disappear into the horizon. This took all morning long, a morning of dreadful anguish. As I stood watching on the summit of Watch Hill, my despair was replaced by burning anger. If I had been allowed to have my fire, there would have at least been a chance that someone could have spotted the smoke. True, the old man had brought me a sleeping mat and a sheet. He was looking after me. He was keeping me alive, but he was also keeping me prisoner. As the last vestige of the tanker sank from my view, I promised myself that I would never again see such a chance to go by. I felt in my pocket. I still had my precious fire glass. I determined I would do it. I would build another fire, not down on the beach where he could find it, but up here on Watch Hill, behind the rocks, well out of sight. Even if he did have binoculars, and I now had to presume that he did, I would gather a great beacon of wood, but I would not light it. I would set it all up and wait until that moment when I saw a ship. If this one had come, I reasoned, then another one would come. It had to come, and when it did, I would have my fire glass ready, and a cache of paper-thin, tinder-dry leaves. I would make such a blazing inferno of a fire that would send up such a towering smoke signal that the next ship that happened along would have to see it. So now I no longer spend my days just sitting on Watch Hill waiting. Every hour I was up there, I spent building my beacon. I would drag great branches up over the rocky scree from the forest below and pile them high, the perfect place to be seen on my hilltop. But in the meantime, not by the prying eyes of the old man, who I thought now was my captor, and he would be watching me. I was quite sure of that, though all the fetching and carrying I kept well out of his sight. Only eyes from the sea could possibly have known what I was up to, and there were no eyes out there to see me. It took several days of hard labour to build my secret beacon. I'd almost finished when someone did indeed discover what I was up to, but it wasn't the old man. I was heaving a massive branch onto the pile when I felt a sudden shadow come over me. An orangutan was looking down at me from the rock above. I could not be sure if it was the same one as before. He was not on all fours. He was on all fours, his great shoulders hunched, his head lowered, eyeing me slightly sideways. I dared not to move. It was a standoff, just as it had been before down on the beach.